9 million souls are currently wedged into the frantic, pulsing arteries of a metropolis that never sleeps, a place where shimmering glass and steel monoliths appear to grow in real time, swallowing the weathered, yellowed, and moss-choked remnants of colonial villas. Look closely at the sidewalk. A weary woman, her face etched with the grit of the streets, sells banh mi just inches from a construction site, vibrating under the rhythmic thud of excavators. It is a stark tableau of progress, literally grinding the past into dust. The relentless, oceanic roar of millions of motorbike engines tangles with the upbeat synths of modern V-pop, all suspended in a thick haze of roasted coffee, condensed milk, and acrid exhaust. This is Ho Chi Minh City. Yet, in the quietest chambers of the heart for so many, it remains eternally Saigon. Have you ever found yourself standing at one of these swarming intersections, surrendering your body to the human tide, only to be struck by a sudden, haunting question that makes your pulse quicken? Before these glass towers pierced the clouds, before the scorched earth of 2 cataclysmic wars, before the first French boot hit the mud, even before the very concept of a city took root, what exactly lay beneath this asphalt? Was there a shimmering civilization that dissolved into silence? Or was it merely an infinite expanse of wild, primordial marshland and serpentine rivers? Stop for just one heartbeat. Close your eyes and try to imagine. Do you have the courage? Because the journey through time we are embarking upon today is not a dry recitation of dates and dynasties. It is a cinematic epic of human resilience, a narrative so fraught with drama that it will force you to sit upright, holding your breath until the very last second. Are you ready? I am going to lead you through a 2-millennium odyssey, a depth of time so profound that even the eldest generations in America, those who sat before flickering black and white TV sets in 1968, watching the world burn, have likely never glimpsed its true bottom. To find our answers, we have employed a revolutionary lens. We have harvested ancient topographical surveys from French engineers, meticulous colonial etchings, grainy wartime aerial reconnaissance, and the dusty, forgotten records of Khmer temples. We have scoured the silk scrolls of the Nguyen imperial court and the earliest street photography of the 20th century. All of this data has been fed into advanced artificial intelligence reconstruction engines to resuscitate the city's ghost. We aren't just looking at history, we are touching the lived reality of every era. Where history has left ironclad footprints, we dive into the minute details. Where the clues are whisper thin, we honestly acknowledge the shadows of time. This is the most authentic portrait of this land, that human records allow zero fabrication, only reconstruction. But here is the truth that will keep you awake at night. Long before the urban sprawl, the soul of this land was the river. The Saigon River and the Ben Nghe Canal do not merely meet, they collide at the gateway to the Mekong Delta. This strategic convergence, this kiss of 2 tides, is the genetic code for everything ever built here. Whoever held this point held the jugular of trade for the entire delta. It was the navel, connecting the deep, mysterious interior to the vast open sea. Geography was this land's destiny from the very first sunrise. Yet, did you know that before the 17th century, this place was more water than earth? It was a liquid landscape, prone to flooding and constantly shifting. With every monsoon, the horizon transformed. Mangrove forests wove impenetrable thickets, and the ground beneath one's feet was a perpetual mire of silt. On the rare patches of high ground near the river junction, ancient Khmer communities erected trading posts on wooden stilts, slender, fragile-looking homes perched over the water like birds' nests. These were bustling canal-side markets teeming with hollowed-out log canoes, gay dock mock-laden with rice, sun-dried fish, and exotic forest spoils. Archaeological evidence suggests these settlements were far from isolated backwaters. They were vital nodes in a sprawling Khmer commercial network that stretched across what we now know as southern Vietnam and Cambodia. Close your eyes, and you can almost hear the prehistoric call of water birds, the rhythmic dip of oars, and the faint, haunting chime of a Buddhist temple bell echoing across the marsh at twilight. You can smell the wet earth, the sodden vegetation, and the thin ribbons of cooking smoke snaking through the humid air. Then, slowly, a new tide arrived, not of water, but of people. The Nam Tien, southward expansion of the Vietnamese, was a generational march, a persistent movement that accelerated fiercely by the 17th century. Here is a startling historical truth. The Khmer communities didn't vanish in a flash of musketry or a singular climactic siege. There was no Independence Day moment. Instead, they receded deeper into the hinterlands, assimilated, or simply became invisible within the official records. It was a silent, creeping demographic shift over decades, so quiet it left almost no significant archaeological scar on the earth. One civilization simply dissolved into the belly of another. Imagine that quiet loss. Thousands of Khmer families watching their familiar world fade, their children beginning to speak Vietnamese, their ancestral customs blurring like ink in the rain. Historians call this a historical gap. But you won't believe what happened next when the newcomers realized they needed something much grander than a collection of fishing hamlets. By the late 17th century, the Nguyen lords, the burgeoning power in the south, decided to formalize this river junction into a serious administrative hub. An outpost emerged, featuring earthwork fortifications, wooden barracks for the garrison, and a nascent market street hugging the riverbank. They were not alone in this endeavor. Chinese merchants, the Minh Huang, refugees who had fled the collapse of the Ming dynasty, were already on the ground. They built sturdy warehouses, operated transnational trade networks, and laid the foundations for the vibrant commercial district that would eventually become Cholon. This area is the oldest continuous urban thread in the city. You can still feel its bones in the cramped, winding alleys of District 5 today. Back then, the ground was a dusty ochre clay. The roofs were thatch, and the air was filled with the rhythmic chanting of laborers dredging the canals. Vietnamese and Cantonese dialects mingled over stalls of silk and spice. The water traffic was a 2-4-hour chaos of commerce, but then a hurricane of civil war descended. The Tay Son rebellion of the late 18th century roared down from the north, consuming the settlement in a wall of fire. The town was razed, the population scattered into the swamps. The first true destruction of the city did not come from a foreign invader, but from the internal power struggles of the Vietnamese themselves. This is a crucial detail often buried by later colonial narratives. This land was already complex, contested, and soaked in blood long before a single European sail appeared on the horizon. The arrival of one man with absolute ambition changed everything. And he brought Western steel with him. In 1802, Nguyen An ascended the throne as Emperor Gia Long, founding the Nguyen dynasty. What he built in the south was a thunderous declaration of sovereignty. He commissioned a massive, star-shaped Vauban citadel, a European military design, constructed of hardened brick with deep moats and emplacements for long-range cannons. The primary architects, French military advisors who had traded their expertise for political leverage and strategic footholds. Inside those walls were majestic administrative halls and imperial barracks, a grid of order imposed upon the chaotic network of canals outside. But look beyond the walls. There remained a world of sprawling markets, of water dwellers living on floating rafts, and a Chinese Cholon that operated almost as an independent city-state. The city's morphology was being altered forever. Fired brick replaced wood, white lime wash covered the walls, and the rigid geometry of military engineering began to crush the soft, organic lines of the river landscape. Yet, here is the chilling paradox. The very fortress built to protect Vietnamese sovereignty contained the DNA of the French. Colonization had a perfect architectural and geopolitical dress rehearsal before the first shots were ever fired in anger. In 1859, a French fleet steamed up the Saigon River. The formidable walls designed by Frenchmen half a century earlier were breached and leveled by French cannons in a matter of days. The imperial troops fled. Saigon became quite literally a ghost town. The population vanished into the countryside, the streets were hollowed out, and the air stank of gunpowder, river silt, and the charcoal of smoldering ruins. Almost immediately, French officers began sketching a new city on blank sheets of paper. They didn't want a mere garrison, they envisioned an imperial capital. But the land was not easily broken. Malaria and dysentery cut down more French legionnaires than any insurgent weapon. The Mekong Delta was fighting back in its own biological way. However, Paris had made its decision. Money flowed like water. Within 20 years, Saigon underwent a staggering metamorphosis. Wide, Haussmann-style boulevards were sliced through rice paddies and ancient canals. The very canals that had been the city's circulatory system for centuries were filled with earth and paved with stone. Colossal public buildings rose under the blistering tropical sun, built with the sweat and blood of Vietnamese and Chinese laborers. The port of Saigon became a true maritime hub, heavy with the scent of raw rubber, export rice, and coal smoke. The Notre Dame Cathedral, built with pink bricks, shipped across the ocean from Marseille. The Central Post Office, the City Hall. These monuments still stand today, testament to an intense colonial ego. But behind the grandeur were rubber plantations run on forced labor and taxes that broke the backs of the peasantry. The French weren't just building a new city, they were burying an old one beneath European asphalt. By the early 20th century, Saigon had reached the apex of colonial self-indulgence. Electric trams clattered down the boulevards, the French elite waltzed in the Cercle Sportif, and Rue Catinat, now Dong Khoi, became a glittering spine of cafes, tailors, and bookshops. Yet the city possessed two increasingly segregated faces. A planned, orderly French Saigon sat adjacent to a crowded, labyrinthine Viet-Chinese Saigon, where colonial planning never dared to reach. These two worlds breathed different air and carried entirely different political temperatures. When the Great Depression shattered the global markets for rubber and rice, the cracks began to widen. Rural poverty pushed a tide of migrants into the squalid peri-urban slums. The Vietnamese Communist Party was born from this very desperation. Then, World War II upended the board. From 1940 to 1945, Saigon existed in a surreal state, two masters at once. The Japanese flag flew alongside the French tricolour. French officials still occupied their desks, but the real power lay in the hands of the Japanese Kempeitai. The city became suffocating, a place of constant surveillance and lurking danger. When the French returned in 1945, they found a city that had outgrown them. The people had seen the old order crumble. Ho Chi Minh had declared independence. The First Indochina War erupted. Saigon became a military oasis, where life carried an eerie veneer of normalcy. Cinemas stayed open, rooftop bars served chilled wine, but beneath the surface ran a subterranean current of resistance. In 1954, after the catastrophic defeat at Dien Bien Phu, the French left for good. It wasn't a chaotic retreat, but a quiet administrative handover. However, another event radically altered the city's volume. 1 million people from the north migrated south. In just a few years, Saigon's population skyrocketed, absorbing nearly double its residents in record time. New parishes and sprawling working-class districts rose to encircle the old urban core. Northern accents began to meld with southern tones, and on the signage, English began to elbow French aside as the first American advisors arrived, accompanied by a flood of aid dollars. By the mid-1960s, Saigon transformed into something unprecedented in history, a metropolis racing against a war while experiencing a hyperinflated consumer boom. Honda motorbikes flooded the streets almost overnight, replacing the rusted bicycles of the past. The Rex Hotel became the nerve center of wartime media management, where American generals and international journalists shared a view of streets choked with diesel smoke. Saigon was a city vibrating with energy, yet it was sitting directly on a powder keg. Then came the night of Tet, 1968. The sound of celebratory firecrackers was replaced by the staccato bark of AK-47s and the roar of B-40 rockets. The assault on the US Embassy in the heart of the city caused a psychological shock from which the establishment never recovered. Though the buildings were patched up quickly, the illusion of a total military victory was shattered. The Americans began their long withdrawal. The wartime economy deflated like a punctured balloon. The question was no longer who will win, but how will Saigon end? April 13, Omia Noa Sute Shaptezich Shichinch. It was a day of uncanny silence, punctuated by extreme chaos. On the sidewalks, South Vietnamese uniforms were discarded in heaps as the chain of command dissolved. The roar of helicopters lifting off the roof of the CIA building became an indelible scar on the historical memory. And then, rumbling down the wide boulevards the French had built for parades, came the tanks of the North. When Tank 843 crashed through the gates of the Independence Palace, a 2,000-year chapter slammed shut and a new, uncertain one began. The years that followed brought a different kind of silence: re-education camps, nationalization, and the mass exodus of the middle and upper classes, the boat people, who left carrying a piece of old Saigon's soul with them. The city was officially renamed Ho Chi Minh City, but a miracle of continuity occurred. Almost everyone still called it Saigon. In directions given to travelers, in the whispers of sidewalk cafes, the name endured a small, linguistic act of rebellion against forgetting. Saigon didn't disappear. It simply went underground, hiding beneath the layers of time, waiting for those patient enough to listen. This city is a resilient organism, a grand survivor that has endured conquests, horrific plagues, imperial dominion, and the aftershocks of 2 brutal wars. Yet, after 1975, it faced a challenge without precedent, a deliberate economic dismantling. From 1975 to 1986, Saigon fell into a strange, suspended animation. Physically, the city remained intact, but its economic heartbeat flatlined. If you had strolled those streets in 1980, you would have seen the skeleton of a magnificent metropolis, the dignified French facades, the sturdy American infrastructure, and the vast boulevards. But the commercial breath that was the city's very soul had gone terrifyingly still. Shops were nationalized, shelves were bare, and once flamboyant shopkeepers had either fled or retreated into the shadows of decay. Cholon, the engine room of the economy for 3 centuries, was devastated. Wealthy merchant families either gambled their lives on the South China Sea as boat people, or watched their fortunes be confiscated. In this vacuum, the black market flourished like weeds in the cracks of a pavement. It was the only place where true trade happened to keep people alive. The boat people crisis became one of the most haunting humanitarian tragedies of the late 70s and early 80s. Hundreds of thousands, both ethnic Chinese and southern Vietnamese, entrusted their lives to the sea on whatever vessels they could find, fleeing a new order they could not navigate. In a few short years, the city lost a massive portion of its elite, its brilliant merchants, and its most skilled professionals. The visual texture of Saigon during this era was like an old film with the volume turned down. The paint on colonial buildings peeled and faded. Shutters remained perpetually closed. Motorbikes became a rare sight. In their place, Soviet-style propaganda posters began to plaster over the old French and American signage. Then, in 1986, the world shifted on a single word: Doi-moi, renovation. It wasn't just a policy, it was a resurrection. The Vietnamese government decided to pivot toward a market-oriented economy. What happened to Saigon next occurred with a dizzying velocity that echoed the boom times of a century prior. In less than a decade, the city became unrecognizable as economic energy erupted from the ground. Foreign investment began to pour in like a deluge. Construction cranes sprouted across the skyline like giant arms drawing the future. The wave of motorbikes returned, but this time they weren't symbols of foreign flash. They were the mark of domestic prosperity and rising incomes. The 1990s saw the first glass office towers rise proudly beside ancient colonial storefronts. International hotels reclaimed the iconic buildings of the French era. The vibrant cafe culture roared back to life on Dong Coi, the Rue Catinat of a distant past, but this time, young Vietnamese entrepreneurs occupied the seats once held by colonial masters. As the calendar flipped into the 2000s and 2010s, the velocity of change shifted from a steady gallop to a breakneck sprint. The Bitexco Financial Tower, completed in 2010 with its distinctive lotus bud silhouette and cantilevered helipad, pierced the clouds like a glass and steel exclamation point. It was more than just a building, it was a manifesto to the world. declaring that this was no longer a war-torn relic, but a premier megacity of the 21st century. Districts 2 and 7, once the forgotten, mosquito-ridden marshlands and wild paddies of the 1990s, underwent a metamorphosis so profound it felt like time-lapse photography. In a mere 20 years, these swamps were drained and replaced by miniature Singapores, glittering urban sanctuaries of luxury high-rises, manicured parks, and international schools. The river, that ancient silver witness that has seen every rise and fall of this land, now finds itself hemmed in by the towering sentinels of luxury apartments dominating the East Bank. Massive suspension bridges and the hollow subterranean echo of the Thu-themed tunnel have stitched together the once isolated rural fringes with the opulent, neon-lit center. The city's pulse has changed its rhythm too. The iconic roar of millions of motorbikes remains the baseline, but it is now layered with the percussive thud of pile drivers, the screech of steel on steel from subway construction, and the digital chirps of V-pop and TikTok trends bleeding from the smartphones of the youth. The median age in Ho Chi Minh City is startlingly low. These are people with no memory of the Hunger Years or the subsidy period. They are young, they move with a frantic, beautiful urgency, and they are building something gargantuan. It is the cacophony of ambition, the noise of prosperity, not the scream of a bombshell. Yet, this dizzying ascent has cast long, dark shadows. The city's arteries are clogged. Traffic congestion has evolved from a daily nuisance into a suffocating structural grind of steel and exhaust fumes. And there is a deeper, more silent existential threat. The very geography that made this delta so fertile and wealthy is now becoming its greatest burden. Saigon is sinking. The relentless extraction of groundwater has caused the earth to sag under the weight of its own ambition, even as the global sea levels rise to meet it. Flooding, which used to be a seasonal inconvenience, is now a regular, menacing intruder. The contrast between the shimmering glass spires of the elite and the labyrinthine, corrugated-roofed slums where the true backbone of the city resides has become sharper and more poignant than ever before. And here is a sobering truth to ponder at the end of our journey. Ho Chi Minh City now sits precariously on the list of global megacities, most at risk of being wiped off the map by the rising tides. The river that served as the city's lifeblood, its spine, and its escape route for 2,000 years, may one day rise to reclaim the very ground it once gifted to humanity. So, we return to the present. The same street, the same river, the same delta, tucked under 1,000 different flags, ideologies, and reconstructions. The Saigon River rolls on, indifferent to the concrete that attempts to cage it or the bridges that span its back. It flows with a quiet, regal apathy toward political upheavals. This water once nourished ancient Khmer hamlets, carried the heavy ironclads of French invaders, and bore the weight of desperate boat people fleeing toward a terrifying horizon. Today, it reflects the neon glow of skyscrapers and carries massive container ships where wooden rice barges once drifted. Flags fade, empires crumble, ideologies are rewritten, but the river remains. What lingers, after all the smoke has cleared, is a city that has been leveled, scorched, and partitioned, only to rise with a defiant, stubborn resilience for 2 millennia. This is a place that has never learned how to stop. Here, resilience isn't a marketing slogan. It's a genetic blueprint for survival. And regardless of the official names on the maps, the people still call it Saigon in the whispered intimacy of roadside cafes and the frantic breath of daily life. That name lives in a space where bureaucracy can never fully reach. Every street corner is a palimpsest of history. A colonial facade here, a wartime bunker there, a glass office tower rising behind both. All sound. It is a chaotic, beautiful, and unmistakable identity. Through the eyes of an American who has witnessed the long arc of this history, there is a lump in my throat when I see this rebirth. I have sat with elderly Vietnamese men and women, the ultimate survivors. They saw their homes shattered in the fires of 1975. They tasted the salt spray and the fear of the open sea during the Great Migrations. Yet, today, they sit on plastic stools, calmly sipping iced coffee with their grandchildren. They recount the past with a serene, terrifyingly beautiful grace. There is no venom in their stories, no thirst for revenge. The past is a library, one old man told me, his eyes crinkling as he watched the sunset hit the Bitexco Tower. You go there to learn, not to live. American veterans who return here often tell me the same thing. They remember the chaos and the darkness, but they also remember the light they saw in the eyes of the Saigonese. Even then, a stubborn, unquenchable spark that no amount of ordnance could blow out. That is the ultimate lesson for us all. History is not a tool for nursing old wounds or deepening divisions. It is a reminder that the peace and prosperity we enjoy today were built upon a mountain of silent sacrifices from every side. We must tell these stories so the next generation understands that true power isn't found in the barrel of a gun, but in the capacity to stand up from the rubble, to remember everything, and yet to choose to build a future out of forgiveness. If this story has touched your heart or made you appreciate the quiet peace of your own home a little more, please share it. Someone out there might need this reminder of human resilience today. And if you want to walk with me through the hidden histories of another city, perhaps the ancient stones of Rome, the neon alleys of Tokyo, or the resilient heart of Warsaw, leave the name in the comments. We will set out again together to listen for the most valuable echoes of humanity. Thank you for staying with me until the very last word.